My dear brothers and sisters in Christ, venerable brothers in the episcopate and the priesthood, distinguished leaders, and all men and women of goodwill, there are those, even within these ancient hallowed walls, who whisper that my first 100 days have been a scandal. They speak in hushed tones in the corridors of power. They write with furrowed brows in the columns of the world's newspapers. They murmur in parishes that have grown comfortable with the world's applause. They say, my words have been a shock to the system. They say, my actions have been an affront to the spirit of the age. To them I say today, with neither anger nor apology, but with the serene and unshakable joy that comes from faith. Good. It is time for the Church to be shocked. It is time for the world to be shocked. Not by novelty, for we have nothing new to invent. Not by revolution, for our mission is not to overthrow, but to sanctify. No, it is time for us all to be shocked by the stunning, the electric, the eternally youthful power of the truth we have guarded for 2,000 years. A new wind is blowing on Rome. You feel it, I feel it. It is not the warm, gentle breeze of the season that coaxes the flowers of May to bloom. It is the powerful, rushing wind of the Spirit, the same wind that descended as tongues of fire at Pentecost. It is the wind that crosses the centuries, sweeping away the dust of complacency and reawakening what was thought to be buried forever under the heavy ashes of compromise and worldly convenience. From this very square of St. Peter, the tomb of the fisherman, to the most austere corridors of the Apostolic Palace, something has started moving again. It is as if the Church, after years of a subtle but suffocating doctrinal apnea, was finally, truly catching its breath. The name that whispers among the ancient naves, in the forgotten convents, in the resistant canons, and in the still living seminaries is the name of my office, the name of Leo. A recent pope, yes, but one who desires only to be a sign of the times, a different time. Not because it is new, but because it is truly old, ancient, profound, and unapologetically Catholic. The wind that I pray accompanies my ministry is not the wind of rupture, but of return, a return to the faith that saves, not the ideologies that flatter, a return to the truth that converts, not the opinions that comfort, a return to the Church that is not ashamed of its Lord, that does not dilute his teaching to win the fleeting approval of the world. Here you will find no smoke of sociological incense designed to obscure the cross. Here you will find no cloying perfume of a complacent press, eager to remake the Church in its own image. Here, in the heart of the Church, we are breathing pure doctrine again. And for many who have grown accustomed to a watered-down, accommodating, and sentimental ecclesial climate, this sudden change of air has the bracing and, yes, decidedly uncomfortable effect of a north wind on the neck. It is awakening, but it is not gentle. They say I have scandalized them. And why? Because I dared to speak Catholic things. Because in an age of calculated ambiguity, I spoke with clarity. Let us examine these scandals. I spoke about the family. I did not invent a new definition. I did not commission a study group to gauge public opinion. I called it what it is, what God made it to be, and what the natural law confirms it to be, the stable, faithful, fruitful, and indissoluble union between one man and one woman, open to the gift of life. Not parent one and parent two, not a vague emotional unit subject to the whims of feeling, not a social construct to be redefined by legislatures. No, I spoke of that sacred stuff, that divinely ordained reality that has made society exist for centuries, the first cell of all social life, the domestic church where faith is first lived and taught. In a world that desperately seeks to erase the beautiful and meaningful distinction between man and woman, to flatten the creative genius of God into a gray, undifferentiated mass, the church must shout from the rooftops the glory of sexual complementarity. It is not a limitation, it is a gift. It is not a source of oppression. it is the very grammar of creation. Man and woman, in their blessed difference, reveal something of the nature of God Himself, a communion of love that is life-giving. To defend this is not to be old-fashioned. It is to be a defender of humanity itself. To defend this is not to judge or condemn those who are confused or live in different situations. It is to hold up a lighthouse of truth and beauty for all, especially for our children, who deserve to know the truth of their origins and the stable foundation upon which to build their own lives. This truth is not a burden. It is a liberation from the exhausting and impossible task of inventing oneself from scratch. They were shocked, they say, when I spoke of human dignity. They were not shocked because I used the phrase, it is a popular one, easily employed by all manner of institutions. They were shocked because I dared to defend it where it is most inconvenient, most voiceless, and most brutally assaulted in our modern, sophisticated world. I defended it in the sanctuary of the mother's womb. In an age that celebrates radical autonomy as its highest good, I spoke for the most dependent human being of all, the unborn child. I insisted, and I will continue to insist, that from the moment of conception, a new, unique, unrepeatable human life has begun its journey. This is not a matter of theological opinion. It is a fact of biological science, and this biological fact demands a moral response. To deny this personhood, to subordinate this life to the choice or convenience of another, is the ultimate expression of a throwaway culture. It is the powerful deciding that the weak shall not live. The Church cannot be silent here. To be silent would be to betray its Lord, who identified with the least of these. There is no one more least than the child in the womb. And I spoke of that same inviolable dignity at the other end of life's spectrum, in the beds of our forgotten elderly, in the quiet rooms of the chronically ill, in the hearts of those tempted by despair to believe their lives are no longer of value. Our world, so obsessed with productivity, with youth, with perfection, has a terrifyingly short-sighted view of what constitutes a life worth living. It whispers the satanic temptation of euthanasia and assisted suicide, dressing it up in the false language of compassion and dignity. But true compassion does not mean eliminating the sufferer. It means suffering with them, accompanying them, loving them, and showing them that their life has infinite value in the eyes of God, even and especially in their weakness. The cross of Christ was not an act of dignified self-elimination. It was an act of agonizing, redemptive love in the midst of profound suffering. Our society has forgotten the meaning of redemptive suffering. We must teach it again. We must build a civilization of love that fiercely protects life from its first moment at conception to its final natural breath. And in this defense of the vulnerable, I name the truly excluded, not the fashionable victims constructed in the ideological laboratories of academia, but the real human beings on the peripheries of our comfort. The unborn, yes. The elderly, yes. The sick, yes. And also the unemployed, who are robbed of the dignity of providing for their families. The poor, who are told that their only hope is a soulless materialism. And yes, the immigrant, not as a political pawn, not as a demographic problem, but as a human person, an image of God, often fleeing from desperation we cannot imagine. The Church's response to the immigrant must not be dictated by the political platforms of the left or the right. It must be dictated by the gospel. It must see Christ in the stranger. It must balance the sovereign right of nations to control their borders with the absolute moral imperative to welcome, protect, promote, and integrate those in need, remembering always that the goods of the earth are destined for all humanity, not just those fortunate enough to be born in a prosperous land. And finally, the ultimate scandal. I spoke of peace. What could be scandalous about that? The scandal lay in the fact that I refused to use the empty saccharine phrases of a United Nations competition. I refused to speak of a peace built on compromise with evil, or a peace that is merely the absence of conflict. I spoke, rather, of the Pax Christi, the peace of Christ. And I invoked truth with a capital T as the one and only non-negotiable foundation for any authentic and lasting living together. In my very first address to the Vatican diplomats, I saw the subtle shift in their posture, the glazing of their eyes, when I dared to shake the glass palaces of ecclesiastical progressivism and globalist diplomacy. Why? Because I dared to say this: the truth is not an abstract concept, not a set of rules, not a cultural preference. The truth is a person. His name is Jesus Christ. And when one truly says that, and truly believes it in the marrow of one's bones, one can no longer be content with dialogue at all costs. One can no longer pretend that all religions are equal paths to the same mountaintop. One can no longer subordinate the proclamation of the gospel to the goal of geopolitical stability or interreligious harmony. Dialogue is essential, yes. Respect is paramount, yes. But dialogue for a Catholic is not a negotiation where we put the truth up for a vote. It is a pathway for charity, an opportunity for witness, an invitation to the other to encounter the person of Jesus Christ, who alone is the way and the truth and the life. I stated then, and I state now, that truth and peace go hand in hand, but only if the first is not exchanged for the second. A peace built on a lie is the peace of the tomb. The world offers a false peace, a peace that comes from ignoring our differences. Christ offers a true peace, a peace that comes from being converted to the truth. The surprise, if there was one, is only present in those circles that have, for too long, mistaken the Church for a progressive political party with spiritual hues, a sort of global NGO with better music and more ancient architecture. But anyone who has kept even a faded catechism in a drawer, anyone who has ever truly knelt before the Blessed Sacrament and listened, anyone who has held fast to the faith of their grandmothers, knows well that Leo XIV has done nothing but state the obvious. Yet today, in these strange times, stating the obvious sounds revolutionary. In an age of diluted, decaffeinated, and democratized faith, simple consistency has become an act of rebellion, and I pray to God to give me the grace to be such a rebel every single day of my pontificate. This rebellion of consistency, this return to the bracing clarity of the gospel, is nowhere more desperately needed than in our approach to the young. Our young people are not a problem to be solved. They are a treasure to be cherished and a force to be unleashed. When I spoke recently to the venerable brothers of the Christian schools who have given their lives to the sacred cause of education, I described our youth as a volcano of life, of energy, of feelings and ideas. This is true, but a volcano can be a source of immense fertile power, or it can be a source of indiscriminate destruction. Its direction depends on the channels that are carved for its flow. For too long, we have watched, often with a sense of helpless resignation, as the world carves destructive channels for the immense energy of our youth. And when I spoke to the brothers, I did not take refuge in the usual vague slogans about accompanying our youth on their journey or listening to their experiences. While listening and accompaniment are essential parts of the pastoral mission, they are meaningless if we have nothing to offer, if we have no destination to which we are accompanying them. We must have the courage of true fathers and mothers to clearly indicate what prevents the new generations from growing up healthy and strong in soul and in body. And I named the poisons. I spoke openly of the superficial relational models that are fed to them through the ever-present screens in their hands, a culture of digital exhibitionism, of transactional friendships, of a pornified vision of human sexuality that reduces the sacred act of love to a form of recreational consumption. These models promise connection but deliver profound loneliness. I spoke of the pervasive individualism that tells them their life is their own project, that their identity is a matter of personal creation, that their highest calling is self-fulfillment. This is a cruel lie. It cuts them off from their roots, from their families, from their history, from their very nature as beings created for communion. It places upon their young shoulders the impossible, crushing burden of being their own God. And when they inevitably fail, it leaves them with nothing but shame and despair. I spoke of the emotional instability that is the direct consequence of this individualism. When there is no objective truth, no moral law, no higher purpose, what is left to guide one's life? Only the shifting, treacherous, and tyrannical sands of one's own feelings. They are taught to follow their heart, but they are never taught how to form their heart. And so they are tossed about on a sea of anxieties, passions, and fleeting desires, incapable of making lasting commitments, terrified of sacrifice, and starved for the very stability they are taught to despise. And I named the philosophical source of this poison, the intellectual disease that has infected the bloodstream of Western thought. I spoke of the thought patterns weakened and crippled by relativism. Here we must not pretend that nothing is happening. No more vague illusions, no more semantic acrobatics to avoid giving offense. As Pope, as the successor of Peter, whose charism is to confirm his brethren in the faith, I have a solemn duty to name relativism as the single most dangerous factor that poisons contemporary thought and culture. It is true I did not explicitly mention my great and luminous predecessor, Benedict XVI, in that address. But those who know the Church, those who have lived through its cultural dramas of the last 20 years, those with ears to hear, cannot help but read in these words a strong, deliberate, and grateful echo of that prophetic teaching that spoke with such breathtaking precision of the dictatorship of relativism. This dictatorship is more insidious than any political tyranny. It does not march in the streets with soldiers. It whispers in the classrooms, it sings in the popular music, it glows on the television screens, it programs the algorithms of social media. It presents itself as humility, as tolerance, as open-mindedness. There is no absolute truth, it says, so your truth is as good as mine. Let us all be tolerant of one another's opinions. But this is a deception. What begins as a supposed tolerance for all ideas quickly becomes an absolute intolerance for any claim to universal truth. The one thing the dictatorship of relativism cannot tolerate is the one who says, "This is the truth." It is a dictatorship that has one single absolute dogma, that there are no absolute dogmas. And so the Christian, who by his very nature must profess that Jesus Christ is the truth for all people in all times, becomes the ultimate enemy of the modern world order. He is branded as an extremist, a fundamentalist, a hater, a source of division. We must equip our young people for this battle. The cure for the poison of relativism is not a more moderate or inclusive version of the faith. The cure is a full-throated, intellectually rigorous, spiritually profound, and joyfully lived proclamation of the Logos, the divine reason, the eternal truth, who became flesh. We must renew our catechesis, moving away from a sentimental, experience-based model to one that teaches the magnificent symphony of the Catholic faith, its philosophy, its theology, its history, its moral reasoning. We must teach our young people how to pray, how to enter into the silence where they can hear the voice of God, not just the echo of their own desires. We must lead them back to the sacraments, especially the Eucharist and reconciliation, as the true sources of grace and healing, the real food that can satisfy their hunger, not the junk food of the culture. We must propose to them the high adventure of holiness, the heroic call to virtue, the glorious challenge of sainthood. We have been feeding them crumbs when they are starving for the banquet. It is time for the banquet to be served. But as the world knows, and as the Church has always taught, words are not enough. Faith, if it is real, must become incarnate. It must take on flesh. It does acts, it makes decisions, it builds institutions, it changes reality. And a pope must not only teach, he must govern. He must act in a way that leaves no room for misunderstanding, in a way that makes his teaching visible. That is why my first pastoral gestures were intended to be read not just as administrative decisions, but as theological statements. Consider the appointment of a young religious from Peru as a bishop to a significant diocese, Father Miguel Angel Contreras Yar Haruna. The world and even parts of the Church looked for a name they recognized, a man known for his media presence, his managerial skills, his alignment with certain political or ecclesial factions. They did not find one. Who is this man? The press scrambled to find information. What they found, I pray, was instructive. They found a man of profound prayer. They found a scholar of the fathers of the Church, a man whose mind is steeped in the great tradition. They found a humble religious who had spent years in quiet formation of seminarians, teaching them not how to be popular, but how to be holy priests. They found a missionary who had walked with the poor without romanticizing them, bringing them not just bread, but the bread of life. I did not choose someone to represent the needs of the world to the Church. There are many who are skilled at that. I chose a man to represent the needs of God to the world. I chose a shepherd, not a spiritual manager. I chose a father, not a functionary. This choice was a message that speaks more clearly than many sermons. The Pope wants pastors. He wants men whose first qualification is their love for Jesus Christ and His Church, men whose knees are worn from prayer, whose hands are anointed for sacrifice, and whose minds are luminous with the truth of the faith. The renewal of the Church will not come from programs or strategic plans, however useful they may be. It will come from holy bishops leading holy priests who in turn will guide the holy people of God. The hierarchy of holiness must precede the hierarchy of administration, and there is another act, one that has caused a great deal of discussion. While my beloved predecessors, for their own valid and humble reasons, preferred the functional anonymity of the Santa Marta residence, I am preparing, as you know, to return to the Apostolic Palace. The second floor of Santa Marta, which graciously hosted Pope Francis, is being emptied and prepared to return to its original purpose of hosting guests of the Holy See. This is not a judgment on the past. It is a decision for the future. And let me be clear, this is not a sober choice of real estate. It is a theological choice. It is a choice about the very nature of the Petrine office. That Apostolic Palace for centuries has been the visible heart of the Church's universal governance. It is not just a building. It is a symbol, and symbols matter profoundly to us, for we are not disembodied spirits. We are creatures of flesh and blood, and we learn and understand through what we see and touch. The world looks to Rome, and it looks for a rock, a point of reference. The Pope is not the moderator of an assembly. He is not the chief executive officer of a multinational corporation. He is not the winner of a popularity contest. He is the successor of Peter, the vicar of Christ, the servant of the servants of God, endowed with a unique and sacred charism to guard the deposit of faith and to confirm his brethren. His office is one of radical service, but also of sacred authority. To reside in the Apostolic Palace is not an act of personal pride. It is an act of official humility before the weight of the office one holds. It is to visually and physically place oneself in the stream of that history, surrounded by the work and prayers of the popes and saints who have gone before. It is to say to the Church and to the world that the papacy is not a personal project that is reinvented with each pontiff, but a sacred office that is received, guarded, and passed on. It is to say that Peter, even visually, must return to being that fixed and stable point of reference in a world spinning in confusion. While some may see this as a step backward into pomp and circumstance, it is in fact a step forward into clarity, a step away from the cult of personality, and a step toward the reverence for the office. One era ends and another begins, an age where we no longer empty our sacred symbols in an attempt to appear humble to a world that will never be satisfied anyway, but where we fill them again with their deep and resonant meaning, to remember who we are and whom we serve. He who has ears to hear, let him hear. And now I must address directly those who are quick to attach labels, for it is the easiest way to dismiss a message without having to engage with it. They will paint me, and indeed have already begun to do so, as a reactionary, a rigid traditionalist, a nostalgic, dreaming of times gone by, a man who wants to turn back the clock. I wish to respond to this caricature calmly and with all the charity I can muster. I am not breaking anything, I am restoring. But we must be exceptionally clear about what this word restore truly means. It does not mean what my critics think it means. I am not restoring dead forms like a fussy, anxious curator in a museum of sacred objects, polishing relics that have no life. The Church is not a museum. Tradition is not the worship of ashes, but the transmission of fire. No, I am seeking with all my strength and with the grace of God to restore the true life of the Church. The life that is made of sanctity, the life that is made of doctrine, the life that is made of mission, the life that is made of souls to save. We are restoring what time and sin and fear have obscured, not because it was outdated, but because it was and remains terrifyingly demanding, because it was and remains true. To restore is to allow the original beauty of the masterpiece to shine forth once more. Imagine a magnificent ancient cathedral. Over the centuries, the smoke from countless candles, the dust of ages, the grime of pollution have covered its glorious frescoes. The vibrant colors have become dull and dark. A fool might say, "This is too dark and gloomy for modern people. Let us paint over it with bright, new, fashionable colors." That would be a betrayal. The true restorer, with painstaking patience and love, does not paint over the original. He takes a gentle solvent and carefully, meticulously begins to clean away the grime. He removes the layers of soot that have obscured the masterpiece. He does not add anything new, but in taking away what has accrued, he allows the original breathtaking beauty to be seen again in all its splendor. This is my intention, to gently but firmly clean away the soot of ambiguity, the grime of theological compromise, the dust of worldliness, so that the beautiful, vibrant, and eternally compelling face of Christ's Church may shine again upon the world. This work of restoration is done with a living gratitude for the giants of the past who continue to speak to us today. I feel a great debt to my predecessors, those lions of the faith. I think of the great Leo XIII, who with his visionary encyclical Rerum Novarum confronted the challenges of the industrial age not with secular ideology, but with the profound and enduring principles of Catholic social doctrine, a vision that is more relevant than ever in our own age of globalized capitalism and digital disruption. I think of the holy and courageous Pope St. Pius X, who waged a heroic battle against the heresy of modernism, that synthesis of all heresies which sought to gut the faith from within, reducing dogma to sentiment and revelation to subjective experience. His battle is our battle today, for modernism, like a virus, has mutated, but it has not died. I think of the often forgotten Benedict XV, a man of luminous theology who guided the Church through the senseless slaughter of the First World War, pleading for a peace not based on power, but on justice and charity. My pontificate, I pray, will take something from each of them and from all my holy predecessors. The social vision of Leo, the doctrinal clarity of Pius, the peacemaking heart of Benedict, but it does so with its own vision, a vision deeply rooted in the entire breadth of our tradition, but firmly turned towards the challenges and opportunities of the future. And at the absolute non-negotiable center of this vision, there are no evangelical values. There is not a vague idea of a shared common good. There is not a program of social justice that could be mistaken for the platform of a political party. No, at the center is Christ, not an idea of Christ, not a historical figure about whom we have fond memories, not a moral teacher whose sayings we can pick and choose, not a symbolic label we can use to gather consensus or build coalitions. No, Christ alive, Christ risen, Christ truly present in the Eucharist, the Son of God, the only Savior of the world. This is the ultimate scandal, the scandal of the particular. In our pluralistic age, it is acceptable to speak of God, of the divine, of a higher power, but it is profoundly offensive to claim that God has a name, that he has a face, that he entered human history in a specific place at a specific time as a specific man, Jesus of Nazareth. It is scandalous to claim that there is no salvation through any other name. Yet this is the foundational kerygma, the core proclamation of the apostles. There is salvation in no one else, for there is no other name under heaven given among men by which we must be saved. Either this is true, or Christianity is a fraud. Either he is the center, or it is all just theater. It is all just empty ritual, moralistic posturing, and self-congratulatory humanitarianism. And I, as the 267th successor to Peter, did not ascend to this office to preside over a theater. Leo knows this. The Church knows this. I will say it. I will shout it in the midst of a world, and yes, sometimes a church that often prefer the accommodating word, the ambiguous gesture, the comfortable silence. We must choose. Will our center be Jesus Christ, the same yesterday, today, and forever? Or will our center be man with his ever-changing desires, his fleeting ideologies, and his desperate attempt to save himself? And so, my brothers and sisters, we can say it without fear, and indeed with great joy. A new wind is blowing in the Church. It is not the wind of change at all costs, for that is the wind of the whirlwind, which leaves only chaos in its wake. It is the deep, steady, life-giving wind of a return to the essential. And for this very reason, it is a wind that smells of the future, a future of hope, a future of authentic renewal. The path ahead is clear. It may not be easy. It will require courage from our bishops, fidelity from our priests, and heroic faith from our laity. It will surely bring the scorn of the world and perhaps the misunderstanding of some within. But it is the only path. The Church must finally begin to walk again, not in lockstep with the world, not chasing after the latest intellectual fashion, not anxiously seeking the approval of those who will always despise her. The Church must walk with her Lord. She must fix her gaze on him, listen to his voice, and follow in his footsteps, even when they lead to Calvary. For we know, with the certainty of faith, that the path of Calvary is the only path that leads to the resurrection. Leo walks, and I pray that the whole Church finally will begin to walk with him again. What do you think? If you have heard in these words the echo of the shepherd's voice, not my voice, but his, then comment with your hearts, not with your keyboards. Comment, Amen. God bless you.